When I stepped back into my hometown of Charleston after more than 15 years lost to the world, I expected the Atlantic wind, the smell of magnolia, and maybe a stranger or two who'd whisper that I resembled a ghost. What I did not expect was to find my daughter, my only child, scrubbing floors in the mansion I had bought for her with my own blood, sweat, and fortune. She opened the door and looked at me like I was a drifter, a nobody, a man worth less than the rain dripping from my worn coat. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you were listening in the comments. She did not recognize me. And worse, she was terrified of whoever stood behind her. Before I tell you how I reclaimed the life that was stolen from me and how I dragged the devils who had enslaved my daughter into the light, you need to understand one thing. I died. Not on paper, not in rumor. No, I died in the hearts of the people who were supposed to protect my family. My name is Adrian Hale, and I am 76 years old. For over a decade and a half, the world believed I had been executed by a militia in the highlands of Sierra Leone or swallowed by a mass grave somewhere in a rebel-controlled jungle. The truth is more complicated. I lived through disease, betrayal, and captivity so brutal that even nightmares refused to touch those memories. But I refused to die. I endured because of one person, my daughter, Ember. The night I returned, the rain poured sideways in sheets, so cold they stung the skin. I stood outside Halecrest Manor, a slate and ivory estate sitting on a hill overlooking the harbor. I had purchased the home, paid in full, with nearly 10 times the amount I had originally intended to spend, wanting Ember to live like royalty in my absence. The house was my promise, my shield for her future. I imagined her now, 36 years old, perhaps married, perhaps with children racing through the halls I designed for her. I walked up the limestone steps, my heart pounding not from age, but from hope. My clothes were ragged by design camouflage to hide the small fortune I carried in uncut gemstones sewn into my coat lining. I looked like a wanderer, but beneath the rags, I was a man with resources powerful enough to shift governments. I pressed the bronze doorbell. A chime echoed within, a sound I had not heard in over a decade. At first, there was silence. Then raised voices. A woman's shrill command. Something crashing. Footsteps. The door opened only a sliver. A young woman stood before me, wearing a uniform that was 2 sizes too large and worn at the seams. Her sleeves were damp, her fingers cracked and red from harsh chemicals. She held a bucket of murky water in one hand and a frayed cloth in the other. Her face was thin, her cheeks hollowed by exhaustion, but her eyes were the warm amber of her late mother's. As I had memorized. "Sir," she whispered, voice trembling as she looked over her shoulder, "you should not be here. You need to leave before the mistress notices." "Mistress?" She pressed a stale piece of bread into my hand. "It is all I can give you." My daughter, the heir to an empire, was feeding scraps to a man she believed to be a stranger. I opened my mouth to speak her name, but the words drowned in my throat like stones sinking into deep, dark water. "Who is at the door, Ember?" The voice came from deeper inside the house, dripping with arrogance. Ember flinched with the instinct of someone who had been struck far too many times. "It's nothing, Madame Rowan," Ember whispered. "Just a drifter. I'm sending him away." Madame Rowan, my late wife's sister, the woman I trusted to safeguard my family, the one person I had believed would keep Ember safe. My blood turned to ice. The door swung wide. Madame Rowan stood there in a silk robe embroidered with snakes the color of polished gold, her fingers heavy with diamonds and rings so large they were ridiculous. She studied my face, squinting, then smirked with the confidence of someone who believed she owned the world. "Well," she purred, "look what the storm dragged in. Adrian Hale, I honestly thought you were fertilizer by now." Ember jerked her head up at the name, my name, and I saw horror, confusion, and something else in her trembling eyes. "Father," she whispered. "No, no, that cannot be. My father abandoned us. He stole everything. He left us with ruin." Her voice broke. Mine nearly did. The lies had been fed to her spoonful by spoonful for 15 long years. Madame Rowan chuckled behind her jeweled fingers. "Take your crumbs, Adrian, and get off my porch before I call the police. You're lucky I even let you breathe the air near this house." She tossed 2 crisp bills onto the wet stone $200 as though it were an act of mercy. Ember begged me silently to leave, terrified for my safety. And so I bent, slowly, letting the humiliation settle deep into my bones. I pocketed the bills. I let them believe they had broken me. Because a predator that limps looks harmless. Because vengeance grows sharper in silence. Because if they knew the truth that I had returned with wealth measured in the millions, with allies, with the rage of a man who had lost everything, they might run. I stepped back into the storm. But as the door slammed shut, they did not see my hand slip beneath the kitchen island. They did not feel the small military-grade listening device click into place. They did not know that war had just begun. The rain did not stop that night. It came down in thick ropes, drumming against the hood of my coat as I stepped off the manor's porch and disappeared into the darkness. I walked slowly, deliberately, letting my back hunch, letting my movements mimic the stumble of an exhausted old wanderer. I wanted them to believe the act. I wanted them convinced that Adrian Hale was nothing more than a relic blown in by bad weather. I circled the property, slipping between towering cypress trees that stood like ancient witnesses watching the rot infect what once had been my family home. In the windows, warm golden light danced across marble floors and crystal chandeliers luxuries I had worked half my life to secure for my daughter. Yet Ember was inside with cracked hands and sore knees, scrubbing tile beneath the heel of a woman who had no rightful claim to any of it. My jaw clenched so tightly I felt the old fracture in my left molar begin to throb, a souvenir from one of the rebel captains who thought beating fear into me would loosen my tongue. It never did. Pain and I had developed an intimate, stubborn relationship in those years. But this pain, this new ache was different. It was the pain of a father who had returned home to find his child turned into a servant in the palace built from his blood. I reached the back of the house where the service door sat beneath a flickering light. Ember often used this exit, I remembered. As a child, she would sneak out to chase fireflies, their tiny lantern bodies glowing through summer nights. I used to catch them with her, laughing as she tried to name each one. Those memories cut deeper than any blade ever had. I positioned myself beneath the old magnolia tree whose branches spread wide like protective arms. There, hidden by the dense canopy, I waited. My fingers drifted to my coat lining, brushing against the stitched pockets of uncut gemstones, emeralds the size of thimbles, sapphires weighing more than the average wedding ring. The rebels thought I carried nothing but prayers and secrets when they left me for dead. They never knew I had hidden wealth gathered across ports and jungles, bartered through the shadows, smuggled under salt sacks and coffee shipments, each gem bought with risks most men would tremble at. Those stones were not for me. They were meant to secure Ember's future. Every one of them was a promise I had carved out of hell itself. Through the kitchen window, I could see her. Ember scrubbed the white marble counters, shoulders hunched and wrists shaking. Madame Rowan stood behind her, sipping wine that cost more than Ember likely earned in half a year. "You missed a spot," Rowan crooned, pointing with her half-empty glass. Ember bent lower, scrubbing harder. "Useless girl," Rowan sighed. "Your father was no better. A man who couldn't keep his fortune or his family. If he weren't already dead, I would kill him myself for the trouble he caused me." My hands curled into fists. It took every ounce of restraint I had earned through years of surviving cages, betrayals, and machetes to keep from storming into the house right then. But anger without strategy is a child's weapon. I needed precision. I needed patience. And most importantly, I needed proof of what had happened to Ember, proof of how Rowan had seized control of Halecrest, proof of the lies fed to my daughter. I slipped the small earpiece into my left ear. The listening device I planted earlier was active. Rowan's voice crackled through. "Do not forget tomorrow's auction," Rowan said. "Halecrest's final remaining assets go under the table before noon. Once they are gone, the girl is useless to me." Auction? Assets? My assets? She was stripping my family's inheritance bare. Ember kept her head low. "Yes, Madame Rowan." Rowan's tone sharpened. "Speak up, girl." "Yes, Madame Rowan." Ember repeated, louder, though her voice shook as if she expected a blow. The sound of a slap cracked through the device. Ember reeled, clutching her cheek. You will answer with respect, Rowan hissed. Something inside, something I thought captivity had hollowed out, forever sparked with violent heat. An old fire. A young man's fury resurrected in a 76-year-old body. I couldn't save her then, not without tipping my hand too early. But I would save her. I would burn the pillars of Rowan's stolen empire to the ground. When Rowan left the kitchen, Ember collapsed onto a stool. She touched her cheek gently. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She whispered into the empty kitchen, Please, Father, wherever you are, please help me. Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I gripped the bark of the magnolia until splinters pushed into my palm. Help her? I would do more than help her. I would return everything stolen from her, every coin, every room, every breath of freedom, and I would make those responsible beg for mercy the way they had made her beg for safety. The back door creaked open. Ember stepped outside, holding a small bag of trash. She walked slowly, her shoulders trembling, her steps uneven. She paused at the edge of the property, staring out at the storm. Lightning split the sky, illuminating her face, and in that flash, I saw the same child who used to ride on my shoulders, who asked for bedtime stories about explorers crossing continents, who believed her father could survive anything. I could not reveal myself yet, but I also could not walk away. Miss, I said softly. She spun around, startled, nearly dropping the bag. I stayed beneath the shadows, letting only the faint outline of my figure show. It is dangerous to be outside alone at this hour, I said. The storm is worsening. She swallowed. You again? You should not be here. I will leave soon, I lied. But I want you to take this. I held out a small object, an old silver locket I had pulled from my coat. It was not the original locket I had given her mother, but it resembled it closely enough to stir memory. Inside was a tiny folded sketch-aid drawing I had made years ago of Ember as a child, smiling with crooked front teeth. She hesitated, fear and confusion warping her features. Why are you giving me this? Because it belongs to you, I whispered. Lightning flashed again. For a heartbeat, she saw my face more clearly, the creases, the weary eyes, the familiar jawline she had inherited. Her lips parted slightly. Do I know you? The wind swallowed my answer. You will, I said. Soon. She clutched the locket to her chest. I don't understand, she whispered. You will, I repeated. Rowan's voice echoed from inside the house. Ember, get back inside. Now. She flinched. I have to go. I nodded and stepped deeper into the shadows. She hesitated one more second. Thank you, she said softly. Then she disappeared back into the house. I stayed under the magnolia for a long time after that. Long enough for the storm to ease. Long enough for my anger to forge itself into resolve. Tomorrow, Rowan would sell the last of Hailcrest's hidden assets she had no legal or moral right to. Tomorrow, I would stop her. But to do that, I needed allies. I needed access. And I needed Ember to rediscover who I was. Not the ghost she feared. Not the stranger at the door. But the father who had crawled back from hell itself for her. Tonight marked the beginning. Tomorrow would mark the reckoning. I spent the night in an abandoned boathouse by the harbor, half a mile from Hailcrest, but close enough to watch the estate's upper windows flicker as Ember moved through her silent shores. The boathouse smelled of aging wood, salt, and a life half forgotten. In a way, it felt appropriate. I was half forgotten myself. I laid my worn coat across the floor, unstitched a seam, and let the gemstones spill into the dim light. Blues, greens, blood-red stones, some rough, some polished by the friction of travel. Each one carried a story. A bribe to secure a truckload of medicine. A payment to escape a firing line. A trade with a smuggler who never learned my real name. And one stolen, enormous violet sapphire was earned by saving the life of a miner who had been buried alive for nearly a day. He had cried in my shoulder when we pulled him free, promising that if he ever made it rich, he would repay me. He kept his word. I placed the stones back into their pockets, careful and deliberate. I would need them soon. Wealth, when wielded correctly, is a blade sharper than any weapon. But before striking, a man must know his enemy. So just before sunrise, I returned to the edges of Hailcrest, slipping through the tree line like a shadow, trained by years of running, hiding, surviving. I might have been 76 in body, but captivity had carved me into something older and younger at the same time, ancient in scars, youthful in determination. From behind a row of hydrangeas, I watched as Ember stepped out with a pail and a rag, cleaning the veranda tiles under the pale morning light. Her hair, once as wild as a summer storm, was tied back so tightly it looked painful. Her shoulders slumped under a burden she never should have carried. Then Rowan appeared, draped in emerald silk like a queen presiding over a kingdom she didn't build. "Hurry, girl," Rowan snapped. "I need you dressed and presentable for the auction. You will serve tea to our guests, and if you embarrass me again, dash." "I won't," Ember whispered quickly. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Your voice. Speak with clarity." "Yes, Madam Rowan," Ember said louder. Rowan nodded. "Better. Do not make me repeat myself." She stalked back inside. When Ember turned, she allowed herself a single breath, one long exhale, as if she were releasing a lifetime of fear. Then she pressed her palm to the small silver locket I had given her. She opened it, glanced at the sketch, and her brows pinched with puzzlement. She traced the child smile in the drawing with one trembling finger. "Why does he look familiar?" she murmured. Because I had drawn her from memory back when she used to climb onto my lap and ask if stars could be caught in jars. I felt the ache of those years like a bruise pressed too hard. I had to move. If I stayed hidden in the shadows much longer, I would drown in my own regret. There was work to do. I crossed the street to the little coffee house that sat across from the estate. Its windows faced Hailcrest perfectly, a clean vantage point, a place where an old man could disappear among the early morning patrons. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. I purchased a black coffee using one of the crisp $200 bills Rowan had thrown at me the night before. The cashier blinked in confusion as I dropped the excessive payment into the tip jar. "For the trouble," I said. I took a seat in the far back corner, positioning myself so I could see the gates of Hailcrest reflected in the window. I sipped the bitter drink, the first warm thing to touch my body in hours. The steam curled upward, reminding me of jungle campfires that had kept me alive when the nights grew too cold. Then I waited. I watched as expensive cars rolled up the drive. Men in tailored suits stepped out. Women in pearls and fur coats followed. They entered the manor as if attending a celebration, unaware or uncaring that the wealth they were about to dissect had been earned by a man who had once fed half the fishing families in Charleston through hard winters. My legacy had become Rowan's bargaining chips. I leaned forward, tapping my fingers slowly on the table. Time to act. I removed a small notebook from my coat pocket, a battered leather journal I had kept during captivity. Inside were names, dates, contacts, promises, debts. I flipped through the pages, searching for people who still owed me loyalty or at least respect. And I found one. Isaac Dorn, a lawyer with a spine of steel and a mind sharper than a surgeon's scalpel. I had once saved his brother from a corrupt militia by trading a stone the size of a pigeon's egg. Isaac had sworn that if I ever needed a favor, he'd cross continents to repay it. The man worked only a few miles from here. I stood, finished my coffee, and left the shop. Isaac's office sat on the second floor of an old brick building near the harbor. Maritime maps lined the walls like trophies from a lifetime of navigating storms, literal and legal. While I walked in, Isaac froze. For a moment, he simply stared, his jaw slack. Then his eyes widened in disbelief. "Adrian, hail," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "A great deal happened after the world wrote me off." He took a few steps closer, studying my face, carefully, eyes tracing the scars, the weight of years, the unmistakable identity beneath it all. "It is you," he breathed. "Good Lord. Everyone thought you were dead." "Not everyone," I replied. "Some people prayed I was." He understood instantly. "Rowan, Rowan," I echoed. "I need your help." He gestured to a chair. "Sit. Tell me everything." So I did. I told him about my return, Ember's condition, Rowan's lies, the planned auction. The years of captivity condensed into a version he could stomach. Some things I kept hidden, some horrors, served no purpose when spoken aloud. Isaac listened with growing fury. That woman has been siphoning your estate for years, he said. She forged documents claiming you transferred ownership to her before your death. Courts bought it because, well, they believed you were gone. She enslaved my daughter in my own home, I said quietly. Isaac pressed his lips together. Then we stop her. He opened a filing drawer, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the desk. I kept everything, he said. Every will, every notarized record, every signature of yours ever filed. Rowan's documents are counterfeit. It will take time to expose them officially, but Dash. I don't have time, I said. The auction is today. Isaac nodded slowly. Then we hit her where it hurts. Publicly, legally, and decisively. He stood, grabbing his coat. Let's go save your daughter. We returned to Halecrest as the auction began. Guests milled around with champagne flutes, admiring artifacts they didn't deserve to touch. Ember stood near a table, serving tea, her hands trembling under the weight of scrutiny. Rowan stepped onto a platform to address the crowd, wearing a smile polished by deceit. And that was when Isaac cleared his throat. Before this auction proceeds, he said loudly, there's a matter that requires immediate legal attention. Rowan's smile faltered. I stepped forward, cane tapping the marble floor, my presence slicing through the room like a blade. Whispers rippled. Someone gasped. Rowan's wine glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, Isaac continued, the rightful owner of Halecrest has returned. Rowan pointed at me, color draining from her face. He is an imposter, a lunatic. Arrest him. But Ember's eyes locked onto mine, and something inside her broke, wide open. Recognition, fear, hope, everything at once. Father, she whispered. The room spun in silence, and I felt the ground shift beneath us all. When my daughter whispered that single word, father, the entire room seemed to freeze. Conversations died in throats. Champagne flutes paused midway to lips, and every head turned toward me with the kind of slow, creeping wonder one usually reserves for sightings of ghosts or miracles. But Ember looked as though the ground beneath her had split open. Her fingers tightened around the tray she held, knuckles whitening as if she were clinging to a familiar world that was suddenly slipping out of reach. The silver locket glimmered at her throat, reflecting the chandelier light like a small, frantic heartbeat. I stepped toward her, each tap of my cane echoing like a hammer against stone. Rowan, meanwhile, strained to regain control. Her voice wavered, but she wrapped it in the sharpness of desperation. That man, she snarled, is a vagrant. He appeared at my door last night, seeking charity. He is not Adrian Hale. She pointed at me with a trembling, ring-heavy hand diamonds flashing like tiny screams of protest. Look at him. He's old, ragged, delusional. Dash. Isaac cut her off. Adrian Hale is nearly 76 years old, Rowan. Of course he is old. And as for ragged, your greed tends to strip people of their comforts. A murmur of approval whispered through the crowd. I kept my gaze fixed on Ember. I had survived jungles, warlords, malaria, nights where death crouched inches from my throat, but nothing had prepared me for the way her eyes searched my face, desperate and terrified and full of a terrible hope. Ember, I said quietly, I am so sorry. She blinked, trembling. The tray slipped from her hands. Teacups shattered around her feet like broken years. Why did you leave us? She whispered. Her voice was small, fractured. Why did you never come home? Rowan seized the moment, swooping in like a bird of prey. You see, she cried, turning to the guests. He cannot even answer. Ember, darling, step away from him. He is manipulating you. Ember didn't move. Her hands shook violently as she pressed them to her temples. She stared at me as though she were trying to piece together the fragments of a long-lost dream. I remember your voice, she whispered. I remember your eyes. But they told me, Dash. I know what they told you, I said softly, and I will explain everything. But right now, I need you to trust one thing. I placed a hand over my heart. I never abandoned you. I never surrendered you. I fought every day to come home to you. Her breath hitched. A tear slid down her cheek. Rowan stepped between us, face twisting with fury. Enough of this pathetic performance, she shouted. Security, remove him. Two guards moved forward, but Isaac raised a hand. Touch him, he said calmly, and you will both be charged with assault on a confirmed legal heir. Because despite your theatrics, Rowan, the paperwork is clear. He opened the folder he had brought, laying out documents on the nearest table. These, he announced, are the signed, notarized, and verified ownership records of Halecrest issued by the county registrar nearly 19 years ago. Rowan's face paled. That cannot be. Those documents were destroyed. No, Isaac said. You forged new ones. Poorly, I might add. Gasps spread like wildfire. Rowan's voice cracked. Lies. All lies. I stepped closer to her, close enough to see the panic trembling at the corners of her mouth. Rowan, I said quietly, your reign ends today. Something inside her snapped. You think you can return from the grave, she spat, walk in my home, and take everything back? After all I've done to keep it running? After all the sacrifices I made? I felt a cold, steady calm settle over me. A calm forged in captivity. A calm sharpened by loss. This house was never yours, I said. It was Ember's, and you made her a servant in her own home. For a moment, Rowan's expression flickered guilt, perhaps, or fear, but then it hardened into something uglier. She was useless, Rowan hissed. A burden, a girl with no spine, no talent, no education dash. Enough. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. Ember flinched as though struck. You do not speak about my daughter that way, I said, every syllable steady and cold. Not now. Not ever. Rowan opened her mouth to retort, but stopped mid-breath. Because Ember, shaking from head to toe, finally found her voice. You lied to me, she whispered. All these years, all those stories, you said my father abandoned me. You told me he squandered everything. You made me believe the world hated him. I protected you, Rowan insisted. You imprisoned me, Ember said. Her voice strengthened small at first, then steadier. You kept me here. You took my inheritance. You took my life and turned it into something cheap. Her hands curled into trembling fists. You made me believe my father was the villain. Rowan staggered back, as if the words had landed like physical blows. Ember looked at me again. Is it true? She asked. Did you really fight to come home? Yes, I said. Every hour of every day, I carried your face in my mind like a lantern in the dark. You were the reason I survived. Her breath shuddered out of her. Then she stepped forward one hesitant step, then another. When she reached me, she lifted a trembling hand and placed it gently against my cheek. Her touch was feather-light, cautious, almost afraid. You feel real, she whispered. I am. Her voice cracked. Father. She fell into my arms. The years collapsed between us. I held her tighter than I had held anything in my life. Guests dabbed tears. Some whispered. Some snapped photos, as wealthy people often do, capturing emotions they rarely allow themselves to feel. But Rowan's expression twisted into fury, so intense it bordered on madness. This isn't over, she hissed. You have no idea what I've done to keep this house running, to keep your worthless daughter alive. My body tensed. Isaac stepped between us. Rowan, you are finished. Am I? She said, a chilling smile curling her lips. That smile told me everything. She still had something. A secret. A weapon. But she didn't know that I had something too. The listening device I had planted in the kitchen. She didn't know that every insult, every threat, every illegal plan she had whispered over the last 12 hours was recorded. And soon, the world would hear it all. But not yet. Not here. Not like this. For now, I kept my face still calm, unreadable. Rowan glared at me with unmasked hatred. This house, she spat, will never be yours again. She turned sharply and stormed toward the stairs, fury echoing behind her like thunder in a narrow valley. Ember gripped my hand tightly, still trembling. Father, she whispered, what is she going to do? I squeezed her hand back. Whatever she tries, I said softly, I will be ready. And I meant it. Because for the first time since my return, I no longer felt like a ghost haunting Hailcrest. I felt like the man who had come home to reclaim it. Rowan's footsteps thundered up the marble staircase, the hem of her emerald robe whipping behind her like a wounded serpent retreating into a hole. For a moment, all that remained in the great hall was the echo of her fury and the stunned silence of the guests, people who had come expecting an auction and were now witnessing the unraveling of an empire. Ember clung to my arm, her breath unsteady, her body trembling in spasms she tried desperately to hide. She had spent so many years learning to make herself invisible that even in the middle of chaos, she fought the instinct to shrink, to vanish, to apologize for her own existence. I placed a steadying hand on her back. "You are safe," I whispered. "I am here." She nodded, eyes red, jaw trembling, still unsure whether she should believe the truth her heart recognized or the lie she had been fed for half her life. Isaac, meanwhile, stepped forward, clearing his throat as he addressed the bewildered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, voice firm but controlled, "today's event is officially canceled pending the investigation of forged documents, unlawful property transfer, and potential financial misconduct. We ask that everyone exit calmly through the foyer." A few guests gasped. Some whispered. Some pretended not to be thrilled by the scandal unfolding before their eyes. But they complied. One by one, they trickled toward the exit, whispers curling around them like smoke. Only once the hall was empty did Ember sink into a nearby chair, burying her face in her hands. "I do not understand," she whispered. "I do not know what is real anymore." I knelt beside her despite the stiffness in my knees, a stiffness earned from treks through jungles, through swamps, through miles of earth hostile to men who wouldn't die easily. "Look at me," I said gently. She lifted her head. "I am real," I told her. "My love for you is real. And Rowan's lies, those were real too. But lies crumble. Truth does not." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. So I continued. "You asked why I never came home," I said. "You deserve the truth." Isaac took a step back, giving us space. I inhaled deeply, slow, steady, as if drawing breath for the first time in years. "I never abandoned you. I was taken." Her eyes widened, pupils shrinking. "Taken," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "Captured. Held. Moved through camps by men who profited from war. I spent years fighting to survive, sometimes for food, sometimes for air, sometimes just to keep your name alive inside my mind so the world would not erase you." She covered her mouth, tears welling again. "I used every connection, every ounce of strength, every scrap of luck to escape. Every night, I told myself the same thing. I must return to Ember. When I finally made it back to the States, my name was gone. My accounts were emptied, my home transferred, and you were nowhere to be found." Ember shook her head slowly. "Rowan told me you had ruined everything, that the authorities seized your accounts because of some illegal deals. She said you were ashamed and ran away, that you left her with a debt, that you left me with nothing." I felt the familiar burn of outrage rise through my chest like a flare. Rowan needed you to believe those lies because she needed control, and she needed you alone. Ember's hands curled into fists. She said I owed her. She told me that working in the house was the only way to repay what you had done to her. I clenched my jaw so hard I felt the old fracture throb again. "You owe her nothing," I said. "Every dollar spent on this house was mine. Every sacrifice made for your future was mine. Rowan did nothing but steal." Ember stared at me, her eyes searching mine for a long, trembling moment. "Father," she whispered, "I missed you so much." She threw her arms around me again, and I held her tightly this time without fear that she might slip away. But our moment was cut short by a chilling sound. A door upstairs slammed. Hard. Isaac looked toward the stairwell. "She is doing something." "Yes," I said. "Something desperate." Ember pulled back, startled. "Do you think she will run?" "No," I said. "Rowan is too proud to flee. She believes she still has leverage." "Leverage?" Ember whispered. "What leverage?" I felt it, the cold intuition honed from years in danger. A predator's instinct to sense when another predator was about to lash out. Rowan has survived this long by manipulating everything within her reach, I said. She will not accept defeat easily. Isaac nodded grimly. We need to find her. We moved as a group toward the staircase, but before we reached the first step, Rowan's voice rang out from above sharp, trembling, yet dripping with venom. Leaving so soon, Adrian? We stopped. Rowan stood at the top of the stairs, framed by the banister, holding something in her hands. Something metallic. Something small. A set of keys. But not just any keys. Hailcrest security keys, the ones that control the locks, the gates, the alarms, the safes. The law will not save you, Rowan said, her voice cracking under its own fury. You think you can stroll in here with your pathetic little reunion and strip me of everything? I was the one who kept this house alive. I was the one who paid the taxes, served the guests, maintained the estate dash. By selling my assets, I said. By bleeding my daughter dry. She hissed. She owes me dash. No, I said firmly. You owe her. Rowan's face distorted into something feral. She owes me, she screamed. She would have died without me. I fed her when you vanished. Ember recoiled. You fed me scraps and told me I was worthless. That is how you keep a girl obedient, Rowan snapped. Gratitude grows best in hunger. I stepped forward. Rowan, it is over. No, she spat, holding the keys tighter. It is only over when I say it is. She turned and fled down the hallway. Ember gasped. She's going to lock us out. Or worse, she might destroy evidence. No, I said, my voice low. She will go somewhere she feels safe. Somewhere she believes she can still control the narrative. Isaac nodded. The East Wing's study. No, I said. The cellar. Ember shivered. The cellar? Why? Because that is where she hid the documents, I said. And that is where she kept the staff she did not trust. I heard it in her voice last night. I heard it through the device. We hurried up the stairs as the lights flickered. Rowan had begun tampering with the controls. As we reached the landing, Ember hesitated. Father, she whispered, are you sure you want to go down there? Rowan has always said that the cellar is where people disappear. I placed a hand on her shoulder. Then we will go together, I said. No one disappears today. The storm outside raged again, lightning casting brief, violent flashes through the windows as we moved toward the east wing toward the cellar door Rowan thought would keep her secrets buried. She did not know that ghosts do not fear the dark. Ghosts are born in it, and I was done being haunted. The hallway leading to the cellar felt colder than the rest of Hailcrest, colder than the storm-washed windows or the marble floors glistening with the last footprints of the auction guests. It was a cold that belonged to forgotten places. Places where secrets were not merely kept, but preserved like artifacts encased in ice. Ember walked beside me, fingers trembling around the locket, her breath shallow and uneven. She kept glancing over her shoulder as though Rowan might materialize from the shadows like a specter of the life that had imprisoned her. Isaac stayed close, his jaw clenched, his steps quiet but purposeful. Every now and then he scanned the corridor, the instinct of a man who had spent years navigating courtrooms where enemies smiled with polished teeth. Thunder cracked overhead loud enough that we all paused. Rain hammered the windows again, wind rattling the panes as if nature itself demanded entry. What if she has a weapon? Ember whispered. She said the cellar was dangerous. She has already used her sharpest weapon, Isaac said. Lies. And now they are failing. But Ember shook her head. Rowan always said the cellar was where she handled problems. Anyone who disobeyed her was forced down there. She said darkness teaches gratitude. My stomach twisted. Rowan had turned Hailcrest, the home I built for my child, into a labyrinth of cruelty. We are not here to be taught lessons, I said. We are here to end them. When we reached the cellar door, Ember froze. The wooden frame was old, heavy, reinforced with rusted steel brackets Rowan must have added over the years. A digital keypad blinked faintly beside the handle. Rowan's paranoid upgrade, no doubt. But the door sat slightly ajar. A thin sliver of blackness seeped out. Ember's voice trembled. She never leaves it open. Then she is panicking, I said. Isaac leaned forward, eyeing the keypad. She entered in too much of a hurry to lock it behind her. Good. That gives us the advantage. Advantage. I knew that word intimately. The rebels who captured me used it as a shield and a threat. They would say they had the advantage when they controlled food, air, light. They would say it when dragging men into new camps, when deciding who lived long enough to suffer another sunrise. But I had survived because I learned a cruel truth. Advantage goes to the one who refuses to surrender fear. And I had surrendered all fear the day I escaped my captors with nothing but my breath and a gemstone sewn into the hem of my sleeve. I nudged the cellar door wider with the end of my cane. The hinges groaned, low, a tired sound like bones rubbing together. A single light illuminated the top of a narrow staircase, but below that, everything sank into darkness. "Father," Ember whispered, her hand brushing mine, "I do not want to go down there." "I know," I said softly, "but you will not be alone." I stepped onto the first stair. The house creaked around us, as though holding its breath. As we descended, the air grew heavier dense with the scent of old stone, damp wood, and something metallic lingering beneath it all. A smell I recognized from the jungles, from rusted chains, from underground storage bunkers where fear thickened with every breath. The cellar stretched far deeper than I remembered. Rowan must have expanded it, carved out new rooms, hidden new sins. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a wide chamber lit by a single swinging bulb. Its light flickered in uneven pulses, casting long shadows that warped across crates, cabinets, and old trunks stacked like relics from abandoned lives. Ember stayed close, almost pressed against my side as she surveyed the room. "Where is she?" she whispered. A voice answered before I could. "Right behind you." Ember gasped. We spun around. Rowan stood near the entrance, halfway down the staircase, clutching a small metal box and a thick binder hugged tightly to her chest. Her robe was disheveled, hair wildly out of its usual polished bun, her face contorted with a mixture of rage and an unraveling sanity. "You should not have come down here," she said, breath shaking with fury. "This room is not for you." Her eyes slid to Ember. "Especially not for her." Ember stepped behind me instinctively. I raised my cane slightly, not as a weapon, but as a warning. "What are you holding, Rowan?" I asked. "The only things that can destroy you," she hissed. "The only leverage I have left. Records, receipts, letters, things you thought you hid well. I have kept them for years. Proof of your shame." I stiffened. "Shame?" I echoed. "You know nothing about my past." "Oh, I know enough," she said, her smile stretching unervingly. "I know about your work overseas, the men you traded with, the camps, the silence. Do you think people will assume you were a victim? Or will they wonder what sort of dealings you were involved in? Why you were captured in the first place?" I felt Ember stiffen behind me. Rowan saw it and enjoyed it. "Oh, yes," Rowan said, her voice turning syrup thick with malice. "Did he tell you the whole story, Ember? Did he tell you he was not just taken but complicit? That he mingled with criminals? That he dash?" "Enough." My voice cracked through the chamber like a whip. Rowan froze. "Do not twist what you do not understand," I said. But she lifted the box higher. "Facts do not need twisting," she sneered. "They simply need exposure." Isaac stepped forward. "Rowan, you are flailing. Whatever is in that box will only strengthen the case against you. You forged documents. You stole assets. You abused your ward. There is no narrative where you walk out of this house unscathed." Rowan's eyes flickered. Her voice came out colder now. "I kept everything afloat. I protected this home. I protected Ember from the truth of her father Dash." "You protected nothing," I said. "You poisoned everything." Her lips curled. "Maybe, but at least I survived." Lightning flashed through the tiny high window, illuminating her face. And in that instant I understood something. Rowan did not fear losing the house. She feared losing her identity. Hailcrest had become her crown, her mask, her justification for years of cruelty. Without it, she was nothing more than a woman who survived on manipulation and vanity. "Give me the box," I said. "No," she snapped. "I am done giving away pieces of this house, of this legacy. If you take this from me, Adrian, I have nothing left." "That is not my doing," I said. "That is yours." Her hands shook violently. Ember whispered, "Rowan, please stop this." No one has to fight anymore. But Rowan's gaze hardened into something frightening. You do not get to speak, she hissed. You ungrateful child, after everything I did for you. You would choose him? Ember swallowed, trembling. He is my father. Rowan went still. And then she laughed. It was a hollow, cracked sound like glass breaking deep underground. You think blood wins? She said. You think a ghost returning from whatever grave he crawled out of suddenly erases everything I've built? She lifted the metal box over her head. I would rather burn every record in this place than hand them to you. And she meant it. The next second happened too fast. Rowan swung the box toward one of the old lanterns mounted to the stone wall. Metal struck glass. The lantern shattered, spilling oil, sparks, and flame. Rowan, Ember screamed. The fire crawled across the floorboards like a living thing hungry for destruction. Dust ignited. Old crates caught. Smoke billowed instantly. Within seconds, the cellar was an inferno waiting to explode. Rowan backed away, clutching the binder to her chest as the flames grew. I grabbed Ember's arm. Isaac stepped forward to shield us from the spreading fire. Rowan's voice rose over the crackle of flames. If I cannot keep this house, she shrieked, then you will not reclaim a single piece of it. And as the fire climbed the walls, reaching for the staircase like hungry, glowing fingers, I realized this was no longer about property. This was about survival. Rowan had turned Hailcrest into her kingdom, and she would rather burn the kingdom to ash than relinquish her throne. The flames leapt with terrifying speed, faster than any of us expected, faster than any fire had the right to travel through a room built of stone and memory. The old crates, stuffed with decades of dry papers, rags, and neglected valuables, provided the perfect fuel. Heat rolled through the cellar in expanding waves, licking up the walls and illuminating the chamber in a violent orange glow. For a moment, all I could hear was the roaring animals roar, deep and consuming and hungry. Ember clung to my arm as sparks cascaded from the ceiling like molten stars. "Father," she cried, "we have to get out now." "Yes," I said, "but we need to be smart about it." Isaac covered his mouth and nose with his coat sleeve. "The staircase is still clear for now. We move quickly or choke." But before we could take a step, Rowan's voice sliced through the smoke. "Do not bother," she shouted, retreating toward the far corner of the cellar. "This fire will be your grave, just as it should have been years ago." Ember flinched violently. I felt her breath hitch. "Rowan, I warned, this fire will kill you first." "No," she screamed, voice cracking. "I was meant to inherit this place. Me. I tended it, protected it, kept its secrets." "You dash," she jabbed a shaking finger toward me. Binder clutched in her other arm. "Dash. You destroyed everything. You died and left the wreckage in my hands." I stepped toward her through the rising heat. "Rowan," I said slowly, "I did not ask you to carry my absence. I did not choose to disappear. And you dash." She interrupted with a shriek that echoed off the stone. "You should have stayed dead." She hurled the metal box across the room. It clanged violently, spilling loose papers and charred scraps across the floor. The fire ate them instantly. Isaac reached for Ember and me. "We are leaving. Now." But Ember looked at Rowan, really looked at her, and she whispered something I did not expect. "Rowan, come with us." Rowan blinked, stunned. Even through the haze of betrayal, even through the pain of years lost, Ember's heart, my daughter's heart, still extended a final mercy. But Rowan recoiled as if Ember had offered her a serpent. "Do not patronize me," Rowan spat. "You think I cannot see the truth? You think I do not know how this ends? You and your father will disgrace me, destroy me, drag my name through the mud. Dash. This fire will destroy you faster than we ever could," I said. Smoke poured from the burning crates like black, suffocating clouds. Rowan coughed but swallowed it back with the stubbornness of a woman who had survived on defiance for far too long. She raised the binder above her head one more time. "These documents are my insurance," she said. "If I cannot use them, then neither will you." She heaved the binder toward the flames. Instinct took over. "No!" I lunged forward, but Isaac reached it first. His foot stomped down on the flaming edge of the binder, pinning it to the ground before the fire could consume a hole. Ember let out a frantic gasp as the pages sizzled and curled. Rowan screamed an animalistic sound that made my blood run cold. "You thief! You traitor! You dash!" The fire leapt behind her, cutting off her escape route. The cellar ceiling groaned. Dust rained from the beams. Somewhere in the corner, something heavy collapsed, sending sparks into the air like angry fireflies. "We must go," I said, pulling Ember toward the stairs. Isaac clutched the binder, shaking off the burning shreds stuck to the cover. "I have what we need." "But Rowan—" Rowan did not move. She stumbled backward, eyes wild and bloodshot, consumed by equal parts fury and fear. "You think you have one," she rasped. "You think this ends with you reclaiming everything? Rebuilding this house? Raising her up like some saint?" She pointed at Ember. "She is weak. She is naive. She is nothing without me." That final sentence, that vicious, ugly lie, ignited something in Ember deeper than the fire climbing the walls. "No," Ember said. Her voice was soft, but steady. "No, Rowan, you are wrong." She took a step forward, trembling but resolute. "I'm not weak. I'm not nothing. I survived you. I survived your punishments, your lies, your cruelty. And I will survive this too." Rowan staggered back, as though Ember's words had struck her physically. "You ungrateful little dash." I stepped between them. "Enough," I said. "She's done listening to you." The flames surged again. A crack rang out overhead like a pistol shot. Brick dust showered down. Isaac grabbed my arm. "Adrian, we have seconds before the ceiling collapses." "Go," I said. "Get Ember up the stairs." Isaac nodded and placed a supporting hand on Ember's back. She hesitated, eyes flickering between Rowan and me. "Father," she whispered, voice breaking, "come with us." "I will," I said. "Go first." As she ran toward the stairs, Rowan lunged desperation, finally tearing away the last scraps of her pride. "Ember!" she screamed, diving toward her. "Do not leave me." Ember froze halfway up the staircase. For the briefest moment, the smallest flicker of breath, she considered turning back. But then she saw the flames reflecting in Rowan's eyes. Saw how Rowan did not reach toward her with love, but with possession. Not with remorse, but with need. Need to control, to hold dominion, to restore the power slipping through her fingers. Ember turned away, and that broke something inside Rowan. She collapsed to her knees, choking on smoke, muttering incoherent curses. She clawed at the floorboards, as if trying to bury her hands in the house she had tried so desperately to own. "Rowan," I shouted, "you must move. This fire will kill you." "No," she rasped. "I will not leave this house. I built this house. I belong to it." Her voice cracked into a wild, broken whisper. "This house is mine." But the house, the real, living memory of Halecrest, had rejected her long ago. A beam above her head groaned, sagged, and dropped. "Rowan," I lunged forward. The beam crashed onto the floor, not crushing her, but blocking her escape with a wall of fire and debris. Rowan screamed, a sound filled with panic now, not rage. For a heartbeat, one impossibly cruel heartbeat, I considered trying to reach her, to drag her out, to save even a woman who had spent years dismantling the life I built. But the fire had already drawn its line, and Ember, my daughter, was at the top of the stairs, screaming my name. "Father, please." I turned back. Isaac reached down, gripping my wrist. Ember reached too, tears streaking her soot-stained cheeks. "Come on," she sobbed. "Please." Rowan's voice shrieked behind me, swallowed by crackling flames. I made my choice. I grasped their hands and climbed one step, then another, leaving Rowan behind in the rising inferno. Behind us, the cellar roared. Ahead of us, Ember cried my name in desperate relief. And as we reached the top step, the house shook one final time, and the cellar door slammed shut under the force of the explosion below. The moment the cellar door slammed shut behind us, the house exhaled a deep, guttural tremor like an ancient creature taking its final breath. Ember stumbled into my arms, coughing violently as smoke chased us up the stairwell like a furious spirit. Isaac shoved the heavy oak door closed, bracing his shoulder against it as another muffled blast echoed from below. "Move," he barked. "We cannot stay here. The whole structure may give way." I wrapped an arm around Ember's shaking shoulders and guided her through the east wing corridor. Smoke seeped from the cracks in the floorboards beneath our feet. Flames flickered up the stairwell behind us, licking at the banisters, climbing toward the ceiling. The storm outside raged in sync with the chaos inside, wind howling through the shattered window panes, rain slanting sideways, thunder rolling overhead like drums of war. But Ember was alive. That single truth burned brighter than the inferno devouring the cellar. We reached the main hall just as a portion of the ceiling collapsed behind us with a deafening crash. Ember cried out, clinging tighter to my arm. Fire surged through the gap, spilling sparks across the polished floors Rowan had once made her scrub until her hands bled. Isaac pointed toward the front entrance. "We get outside. Now." But Ember paused, staring up the grand staircase, the one Rowan had always forbidden her to climb except to clean the railings. "The library," Ember whispered. Rowan kept some of the old records there too. The ones she did not want anyone to see. "Not worth our lives," Isaac said sharply. "We have the binder." But Ember shook her head, trembling. Father's letters, his journals, his deeds, she hid some of them in the upper drawers. "They are proof. Proof that he never abandoned us." I saw the determination in her eyes. The same determination her mother once carried, the same spark that kept me alive in the darkest corners of the world. "We retrieve only what we can," I said. "And we do it fast." Smoke curled along the ceiling as we rushed up the staircase, each step a gamble on whether the house would hold beneath us. Ember led us into the library, a vast room lined with bookcases stretching all the way to the cantilevered ceiling. Dust and smoke blurred the once rich scent of cedar and ink. Books lay strewn across the carpet where Rowan had ransacked shelves looking for leverage. Ember ran to the tall mahogany cabinet in the corner. "This drawer," she said, pulling hard. "She kept the most important things here." Isaac and I helped her force it open. Inside lay a bundle wrapped in brown fabric, old, frayed, stained with time. Ember lifted it with trembling hands. "What is it?" Isaac asked. I recognized the stitching immediately. "My journals," I whispered. "The ones I kept before I left for Sierra Leone. And letters I wrote to Ember while overseas." Ember swallowed hard, fingers brushing the edges of the bundle, as though touching the past she had been denied. "You wrote to me?" "Every week," I said softly. "None of them returned. I thought maybe you did not want to hear from me." She shook her head violently, tears falling. "Rowan must have intercepted them. She said you never wrote." I closed my hand gently over hers. That woman thrived on stolen truths. But before either of us could speak further, the tree outside cracked under the gale winds, its trunk slamming through the library window with explosive force. Glass shattered inward. The storm screamed into the room. "We have to go," Isaac shouted over the wind. I nodded, grabbing Ember's hand. We ran toward the door. But Ember halted again, glancing back at a painting on the wall. It was a portrait of her mother, done in oils when Ember was no more than 5 years old. Rowan had hung it there as a trophy, not a tribute. Smoke curled around its edges now. Ember whispered, "I cannot leave her behind." Neither could I. We grabbed the frame off the wall, coughing through the clouds of black smoke curling upward. Ember held the portrait to her chest, as if carrying a fragile heartbeat. Then we ran. By the time we reached the main staircase again, the fire had climbed through the balusters like a fiery tide. Ember's foot slipped on the smoke-slick marble, but I caught her in time. Isaac shielded us from falling embers with his coat held overhead. We stumbled down the steps just before another thunderous crack split the air. The chandelier over the foyer snapped loose from its chain and crashed to the floor, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The fire roared triumphantly. The house shuddered, and Ember screamed, "The front door!" We sprinted for it. Sparks rained down. Beams groaned overhead. Smoke twisted around us, suffocating, blinding. Then, fresh air, cold, sharp, stinging our lungs. We burst out onto the front steps, just as another explosion ripped through the cellar windows. Ember collapsed onto the wet stone, coughing violently. I dropped to my knees beside her, pulling her close as Isaac staggered away to call emergency services. Behind us, Halecrest Manor, once a symbol of my life's work. My hope for Ember's future was swallowed in flames. Rain pounded the roof in violent sheets, steam rising where water met fire. Lightning carved bright scars across the sky. The tower windows shattered outward, spilling sparks into the storm. The estate glowed from within like a dying sun. Ember watched it burn, her voice quivering. "Father, the house, everything you built, it was just a building," I said softly. "No," she whispered. "It was our home." I turned her face toward me. "No," I repeated, brushing soot from her cheek. "Our home is not wood or stone. It is not halls or chandeliers. Our home is here, dash." I placed my hand over her heart, then over mine, dash, and here. She broke into tears, collapsing against me as the fire consumed the last of the roof beams. "I thought I lost you," she sobbed. "I came back," I said. "I promised I would." We stayed like that until the fire trucks arrived, spraying torrents of water onto the blazing estate. Firefighters shouted orders, axes chopping through fallen beams. Ember trembled against me, each sound jolting through her bones. When the blaze finally surrendered to the storm, the mansion stood charred and skeletal broken ribs of a once proud structure. Isaac returned, binder still clutched protectively under his coat. Soot streaked his face, but his eyes were sharp. "Adrian," he said, kneeling beside us. "The authorities are on their way." Rowan's voice faltered. "They found her." Ember stiffened. "She is alive?" she whispered. Isaac hesitated. "No." Ember squeezed her eyes shut, tears escaping silently. I bowed my head. Rowan had chosen destruction over redemption, chosen a throne of ash rather than a life rebuilt. "I am sorry," Isaac said quietly, "for everything she put you through." Ember nodded, but her eyes stayed fixed on the smoldering ruins on the last prison Rowan had ever kept her in. After a long moment, she spoke. "Let her go," Ember whispered. "Let the past burn with the house." I looked at my daughter now, standing in the rain, clutching the portrait of her mother and the bundle of journals against her chest, and I saw strength where Rowan had tried to plant shame. I saw courage where Rowan had tried to instill fear. I saw a woman becoming whole. "Ember," I said softly, "tomorrow we begin again." She leaned into me, her voice barely audible over the storm. "With you?" she asked. "With me," I promised. "Where will we go?" "Anywhere you want," I said. "Anywhere the world still has light." She smiled, faintly sad, hopeful, exhausted, alive. Isaac placed a heavy hand on my shoulder. "We will rebuild your legacy, lawfully, brick by brick." And Ember, dash, he turned to her, dash, "everything Rowan stole will return to you. Every cent, every deed, every right." Ember swallowed. "I do not need the house." "No," I said. "You never did." She looked at me, truly looked this time with a clarity that made my chest ache. "All I ever wanted," Ember whispered, "was you." I pulled her into my arms. The fire hissed behind us as the last of Halecrest's flames died under the storm's relentless downpour. Smoke curled into the night sky like a fading memory. And for the first time in more than 15 years, I felt something I once believed the world had stolen permanently. Peace. Not the kind found in silence or isolation, but the kind found when a father and daughter, long separated by lies and suffering, finally step into the same future together. As dawn crept over the harbor, turning the clouds pale gold, Ember slipped her hand into mine. "Father," she murmured, "what now?" I squeezed her hand gently. "Now," I said, "we build a new home. Not of stone, not of chandeliers, dash." I touched her heart, but of truth. She breathed out a soft, fragile sound. And for the first time since returning, I knew this story, our story, would not end in ashes. It would begin in them.